Hello everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you once again for tuning into my channel. I haven't scripted this video, so I'm not sure which way it's going to go. I have a rough idea in mind on the things I'd like to say, so I'm going to make this video piece by piece, and hopefully by the end of it, it makes sense. If I had to script this, I would probably spend a couple days putting this together so it all flows properly, but unfortunately I simply don't have that kind of time, so I'll have to fumble through this material as I think out loud. So this is something I'm working through as a problem. Once again, I'll be talking on the subject of mud flood, and if you'd like a background video explaining this concept of mud flood, please check out Philip Druginin, Mud Flood, the biggest conspiracy in history, and you'll understand my video a little bit better if you watch that one first. Now, in this video, I'm not going to the effort to look at old pictures and photographs and Google Map images of local buildings to show evidence of mud flood. I'm going on the pretenses that that's already an established concept and you've seen such videos. So if you're watching my video and you've subscribed, you watch similar mud flood videos, I'm going on the pretenses that you know what mud flood is and that you don't need more proof through pictures. You've already come to the conclusion that a mud flood event has happened. Okay, so this is a book that I've been reading recently. There's nothing wonderful or great about this particular book, which is called America, A Narrative History, 7th edition, volume 2. It's not a book you should go out and seek to try to buy. It's more or less an academic type of book that maybe they would sell in a college or university and students would read it, and it's a general history of America. I bought this book at a used bookstore. It was very cheap, and for my intents and purposes, I'm using it basically just for a timeline and to get an overall view. The book itself is not great, actually. It jumps from topic to topic and it's hard to follow. But anyway, if I can just outline the problem I have, it's this. It's that we can look up historical images and we can find pictures of many American cities that are bombed out and mud flooded and crumbled and they're in ruins. That we can see, and that's very evident, and that information is not hard to seek out and come across. However, if we are looking for an explanation or a historical narrative that is going to explain to us how these events took place, 200 years ago, then we are at a loss. Because if we look at books like the one I'm reading, America, A Narrative History, we aren't going to find explicit mention of anything like a mud flood. So, I'm calling the title of this video, Get with the Agenda, a closer look at U.S. presidential election campaigns. Now I kind of jumped the gun, but that is the thing I will be looking at today, is U.S. presidential election campaigns. Now why am I going to look at those U.S. presidential election campaigns? Well, they happen every 4 years or so, and every time there's a presidential election, presidents will deal with the debate issues of the day, the problems that the country is facing, and if you study each of the different presidential election campaigns, then you will actually see a narrative unfold from one election campaign year to the next. At least that's my thinking. And, once again, whether I read this book, America, A Narrative History, or I look to Wikipedia for all these US presidential election campaigns, nothing will ever explicitly mention the mud flood. And yet, by looking at old photographs, we know it happened. So, what I'm attempting to do is read between the lines. I'm attempting to see a story within a story. I want to see the true story hidden within the official history. I think this is possible. And just very briefly, we do have an official explanation for this historical destruction and maybe even mud flood. And in one word, that explanation is the US Civil War, right, which happened from, like, don't quote me, but like 1861 to 1865, maybe a little before. And if we look at a battle map of where all these US Civil War battles took place, then we have a pretty valid reason as to how all these old American cities got destroyed. It seems that, like, Virginia, West Virginia, has some of the most evident examples of destroyed cities and ruins, and I think a lot of battles took place there. However, if we look at places like Boston or New York and like Philadelphia, I haven't found too many old destruction pictures from Philadelphia, but if you look at like Boston or Chicago, like during the 1871 fire, you'll find lots of images of destruction. Even in places like Wallace, Idaho, and areas of Montana, there was a historic forest fire in 1910 which ravaged and destroyed cities. We see similar type of destruction even happening in this later time. And just even more briefly, the Chicago fire of 1871. New York had some fires, some great fires in like 1830s and 1840s. Sorry, I'm just going by memory here. And if you look at Philadelphia, apparently Philadelphia had mob riots in like the 1840s, 1844 I think was the year. So if you look into the history of most major North American cities, there is likely somewhere in the history where it has evidence of destruction or rioting. Toronto, Ontario, in 1904, supposedly there was a fire that destroyed much of Toronto. So my point is that a lot of these old North American cities have been destroyed at some point in the past, and the official explanation is either Civil War or Great Fires and Destruction. What I'm going to try and show is that even in the official story, like in this book, America, A Narrative History, that there are small hints of these events. Okay? And I will try to just get right to the point. Okay? You haven't read this book, I have, so just take my word for it. But again, in this book that I'm reading, on page 698, the author has just finished the first chapter of this book. And as most university professors and academic writers do, they tend to include a further reading section at the end of the chapter. And most likely this suffices as a source material for the author's own writing. And why am I mentioning this? Well, I'm just trying to, beyond a reasonable doubt, prove to you that in the years 1863 to 1877, that America, the United States, was going through a period of reconstruction. And I can completely prove this by just at a glance looking at this author's suggestion for further reading. and he's suggesting a list of books that you can read if you want to learn more. So I'm just going to read the titles. Okay, America's Unfinished Revolution, 1863 to 1877. Okay, what else? Herman Bell's Reconstructing the Union, Theory and Policy During the Civil War. A Compromise of Principal Congressional Republicans and Reconstruction. The Failure of Self-Reconstruction in the South. The Ku Klux Klan and Southern Reconstruction. Masters Without Slaves, Southern Planters in the Civil War and Reconstruction. The Road to Redemption, Southern Politics, so it's not Reconstruction. The South Returns to Congress. Okay, here's another one. Mark W. Summers, Railroads, Reconstruction, and the Gospel of Prosperity. My point is that if you want to learn about what happened post-Civil War and during this period, really the whole theme of it is Reconstruction. Now, I haven't fully embraced this idea myself, but there are some strange circumstances surrounding the Civil War, not to mention that a lot of the generals on both sides, Union and Confederate, were educated at the very same higher institution of learning, which was West Point, right? They were classmates. That's strange. But anyway, during this time period, the Civil War, everything was blown to bits. Even areas outside of the battle zone of what's historically understood as the Civil War, even in places like Boston, New York. And so then we have this period of Reconstruction. So if you don't mind me asking of you, try to imagine that everything you know about the Civil War maybe can be put aside for a moment. Try to put the official narrative and paradigm of what happened out of your mind and think that maybe something more cataclysmic happened before that: mud flood, disasters, fire. Then we can really start to see this post-Civil War era, being like 1865 to 1877, as the beginning of a new age, the beginning of a new time period. It really is the beginning of our civilization today, our forms of government, and all of that. And I do mean the civil system. And I'm not going to go off on a tangent, but if you ever wanted to look up the history of the 14th Amendment, citizenship, relating to citizenship, one of the big things after the Civil War was to enfranchise slaves with civil rights. I think that relates to the Emancipation Proclamation and all this kind of thing. And what they really gave people, slaves, was United States citizenship, which is like a federal government citizenship. So people weren't really given state citizenship in whatever state they were residing in. Especially blacks were given United States citizenship. Now, this is an entirely different subject in and of itself, but I just want to make the point that the Civil War, whatever happened after that period, was a time where they were handing out civil citizenship. So now people are coming under the civil system. And just generally, could it be that the secessionist states in the South were refusing the civil system altogether? That's something to think about. As hopefully I'll touch upon it. I don't know if I'll get to it, but a lot of the Southern people who, a lot of people with that Southern accent, those people were almost considering themselves a separate ethnicity, right? And even a lot of people in the South today claim Cherokee ancestry. Even people who are of European descent, they tend to claim Cherokee ancestry. So I think there might be something else going on relating to people in the South trying to retain some type of old system of nationalism or government, but that is worth investigating further. Okay, so once again, the whole theme of what I'm doing is to try and find mud flood, Great Fire, destruction, evidence within the official narrative. And once again, I'm looking at this book, America, A Narrative History. So, I'm going to now turn to page 711, and this whole chapter is devoted to this Reconstruction era, right? And I'm just going to read the very top of the page, and I'll let you be the judge as to whether you think it's talking about mud flood. Okay, so I'm just going to read. I'll read quickly, just to try not to waste time. Growing commercial row crops like cotton on the same land year after year leached the nutrients from the soil. Tenants had no incentive to take care of farmland by manuring or rotating crops because it was not their own. This is talking about sharecropping, so basically people who did not own the land they were working on. This is almost what blacks had a grievance about after this slavery, right? They went from slavery to sharecropping, and they were still disenfranchised from land, so they were still in a state of indentured servitude, right? So that's kind of the background. Anyway, continuing reading, they used fertilizer to accelerate the growing cycle, but the extensive use of phosphate fertilizers only accelerated soil depletion by enabling multiple planting each year. Fertilizer, said an observer, seduced southern farmers into believing that there was a short cut to prosperity, a royal road to good crops of cotton year after year. The result has been that their lands have been cultivated clean year after year, and their fertility has been exhausted. Now, this isn't that exciting, but it goes on to the next part, which kind of generally states what the nature of the land and soil looked like because of this phosphate use of fertilizers and over-farming, not letting the land fallow. Okay, reading again, second paragraph here. Once the soil had lost its fertility, the tenants moved on to another farm, leaving behind rutted fields, whose topsoil washed away with each rain. The silt and mud flowed into creeks and rivers, swamping many lowlands, fields, and filling mill ponds and lakes. By the early 20th century, much of the rural South resembled a ravaged land. Deep gullies sliced through bare eroded hillsides, and streams and deep lakes were clogged with silt as far as the eye could see. Red clay, devoid of nutrients, dominated the landscape. What does that sound like to you? I'll tell you what it sounds like to me. It sounds like there's this mass inundation of dirt and soil over the entire landscape, and the official story is explaining it away by relating it to over-fertilization of land. So we have an official story which is kind of, dare I say, covering up the mud flood incident. Okay, well, I'm 18 minutes in, and that almost took a little too long to explain. I said the title of my video was going to be called Get With the Agenda, a closer look at US presidential election campaigns. So I'm going to turn to that now and explore those. So why am I doing that again? Well, it's because every 4 years these election campaigns happen, and generally each election campaign you would expect that they are talking about the major issues and problems of the day. Right? So we can kind of trace a narrative through time as to the different stages of progression. And ultimately, my point is to look at the Reconstruction after the Civil War, and hopefully to piece some of that together through looking at these presidential election campaigns. Okay, and folks, I can guarantee that this will be the most entertaining video you've ever watched, or have the greatest pictures. I'm going to try my best to put some interesting images to these videos so it's at least enjoyable to watch, but really the whole purpose is to research and educate as far as what official history says. So my point is not to entertain you, it's to, well, it's mostly for my purposes, but I'm trying to educate Okay, so I'm going to start with the U.S. states presidential election of 1852, and I've just written notes that I've kept handy here, and bear with me because I have to get through some otherwise boring information. Okay, I'll try to work quickly. 1852, the Democrat was the Democrat running was Franklin Pierce, and the Whig representative was Winfield Scott. This is the last presidential election where you have a Whig representative. If you don't know what a Whig is, it tends to be associated with the Tories or the Conservative Party going back to English Parliament. Okay, now I'd like to also mention that during this presidential election there was a Free Soil member. Now Free Soil was a party, and that almost stands to be investigated all on its own as to what the Free Soil Party stood for. But it didn't receive very many electoral votes, officially anyway, and yeah, it wasn't that popular. Okay, now what I'm really trying to get at is what are the major issues during these presidential elections. So the issues are slavery, and it seems like all these presidential elections can even talk about is slavery. That's like the only issue they seem to be interested in, according to the Wikipedia official account. Okay, the Whigs, which I guess is represented by Winfield Scott, were anti-slavery. Republican Whigs were associated with the Republicans, which kind of are like the same thing as the Whigs a little bit, are associated with the Know Nothing Party, which I think comes from New York, which is historically a Protestant movement which was anti-Catholic and hostile to German and Irish immigrants. So it seems like these early presidential election campaigns had a little bit to do with bigotry and religious affiliation. And then there's this mention of the Order of the Star-Spangled Banner, which I suppose is associated with the Know Nothing Party in New York, kind of like a secret society, secret fraternity, and it's associated with the Republican movement and the Order of the Star-Spangled Banner. Okay, now even in the Wikipedia article, hopefully I get a screenshot of it, is the lack of clear-cut issues, and it was the election was based on personalities for the most part. That's officially what it says. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the next. How's my time? Next presidential election, which is 1856, which is between Democrat James Buchanan and Republican John C. Fremont. So now we have the Republican Party as an established thing. Okay. Now when you read these Wikipedia articles about the presidential campaigns and elections, they are boring. All they talk about is political jockeying and electoral votes within the party, and it's boring stuff. And it's frustrating because 95% of these articles are this boring electoral votes and all this kind of stuff, and it doesn't really talk about the actual issues at hand of the day. Okay. Okay, also in this 1856 presidential election campaign, there was the American Party, which seems a little bit associated with this Know Nothing Party, which is kind of Republican, and it was the head of the ballot was Millard Fillmore. Okay, the issues once again at this time, this is 1856, are slavery, right? And the Republican Party actually formed over something called the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which was actually creating territory deeper into the interior of the United States, and thus it's called the Kansas and Nebraska Act because it probably led to the creation of the territory Kansas and Nebraska. Okay, also seems to be an issue at this time, although not elaborated in the Wikipedia article, is polygamy in the Mormon settlements. And then also a big issue was the federal assistance of a transcontinental railroad, right? Now, we see in a lot of old mud flood images that it looks, in a lot of instances, that rail lines are actually inundated with mud. So what's the real story here? Are old continental rail lines being unearthed? But anyway, that's getting aside from the official story. The official story here in 1856 is that they wanted federal assistance for a transcontinental railroad. Okay? There's also this other issue at hand, which is called nativism, which generally is meaning that Native American-born people should be favored over immigrants, and at this time it was particularly Irish and German immigrants and Catholic immigrants that were kind of a contentious issue. There was something else called the Missouri Compromise, which again is just dealing with the slavery issue. Bleeding Kansas was a series of small wars, this is even before the Civil War, between 1854 and 1861, which were wars based upon slavery in certain territories and states, particularly Kansas. There was the Ostend Manifesto, which dealt with the purchasing of Cuba from Spain, and again this is actually relating to slavery. Again, there's Catholic Protestant issues at this time, so that's about as much as I want to cover about the presidential election of 1856. Okay, now moving on to the United States presidential election of 1860. The Republican was Abraham Lincoln, that's on the ballot, and Democrat John C. Breckinridge. The issues are, well, if we really want to know what the issues related to this presidential campaign was, we should really just go look at the history of the origin of the American Civil War. And again, they always say that the main issue was slavery, and I have an opinion on that. But coming up in some of the articles I read, hopefully I'll get a screenshot of this in my video when I make it, but a lot of things were relating to ethnicity of the Southerners, right? And this is something you don't hear about so much, but a lot of the people in the South considered themselves to be kind of a certain group of Southerners, and supposedly Celtic and English mostly, but there's also this idea that they were Cherokee, and even many people in the South today claim Cherokee descent, even if they're like white people, right? And they even the people in the South have these different accents from the people in the North. So what's that all about, and how does that come about, right? And I just mentioned here is that there's no foreign country that has ever recognized the Confederacy. I'm not saying that that's actually true historically, but it's like, here's this region in the South and nobody wants to recognize it. So is this area being usurped by some New World Order kind of power from Europe, or what's going on? Popular sovereignty was a big deal in the 1860 presidential election, right? And this is why I'm saying that the idea of citizenship and the civil system seems to have been imposed on people at this time, not in 1776 or even in 1812, but here we have in the 1860s, here's where people are being offered sovereignty. And they tend to be suggesting that all these southern states are slave states, right? So they're being like liberated from slavery through the civil system. That's what it looks like to me, which is a really interesting narrative in the official story, right? So yeah, I made a point to click on. I'm going to pause it. Okay, so I wanted to read the first paragraph of what popular sovereignty was. So I'm just going to read the first paragraph, read it into the video. Popular sovereignty is a doctrine rooted in the belief that each citizen has sovereignty over themselves. Citizens, that means the legal person that the civil system issues you when you're born, right? Citizens may unite and offer to delegate a portion of their sovereignty powers and duties to those who wish to serve as officers of the state, contingent on the officers agreeing to serve according to the will of the people, right? Again, an officer is a legal word, so if you have a board of directors in a corporation and they meet every year to have their board meetings, the people who are on the board of directors are officers of a corporation, right? So here you have the United States using this type of language, right? The people who are citizens are giving up their rights and civil and collectivizing their civil duties and giving it to the officer of the state. So this is neat, because supposedly you have these people like Abe Lincoln coming in and offering citizenship and trying to abolish slavery, but really is the exact opposite thing happening to begin with. People who otherwise didn't have these legal duties are now having the legal system imposed on them. So it almost seems like it's working in reverse. Here you have probably free people without citizenship, and now citizenship is being imposed on them to give up their civil liberties and offer them to officers of the state so they can make collective decisions on people. That's what it looks like to me. And anyway, this idea of popular sovereignty is rooted in enlightened thinking. So you go back probably to like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, if I'm saying his name right, in Europe, who had ideas about the noble savage, and really it's almost like an argument for the legal person, but that's, a whole different debate. Okay, another issue during the 1860 presidential campaign was tariffs between states, right? So if you're in a different state in the US, could you have trade barriers like tariffs and of course tariffs, however you say it, is actually an attempt to develop industrialization within a state. So if you can protect your own industry, you can develop it within your state. That's probably the reason for doing things like tariffs, right? So like the South was big, officially in the official history, the South was big into farming and big plantation farming and things like that. It wasn't industrialized as the North was officially, right? So the idea was that probably a lot of the southern states would probably favor tariffs. You know what? I'm not 100% sure of that. I'm just rambling here. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next presidential campaign, which is in 1864. Okay, I didn't make a whole lot of notes for this presidential election. The National Union representative was Abraham Lincoln. That basically just means Republican. There was like a radical sect of Republicans, and I guess that became National Union. There's more to the story. And then the Democrat was George B. McClellan, who was a general during the war, right? But anyway, the major issues during this presidential campaign were secessionism, or like seceding from the Federation of States. And then some states were pro-war, and some states didn't want war. Believe it or not, I better go back and read the history, but I think Lincoln was actually pro-war. Everybody loves him, but I think he was actually pro-war. Then again, of course, the issue always remains complete eradication of slavery. And who wanted that? Lincoln. And how's he going to do it? Well, he offered U.S. citizenship to everybody. Anyway, yeah, the war is going on at this point, so a lot of the presidential election stuff is probably revolving around the war, according to the official story. Okay, now I'm moving forward to the presidential election of 1868, and I'm going to stop my video and start a new recording in a minute. But the Republican representative was Ulysses S. Grant, and the Democrat on the ballot was Horatio Seymour. And this is the first election of the Reconstruction era. And the Reconstruction era is 1863 to 1877. I kind of mentioned this stuff already, but just to read the definition that shows up here, I'm going to click on it. Okay, where am I? Reconstruction era. The Reconstruction era was the period from 1863, the presidential proclamation of December 8th, 1863, to 1877. In the context of the American history, the term has two applications. The first applies to the complete history of the entire country from 1865 to 1877, following the American Civil War. The second to the attempted transformation of the 11 ex-Confederate states from 1863 to 1877, as directed by Congress. Reconstruction ended the remnants of Confederate nationalism, which was really a real thing, and I don't think that's covered so much in history. But anyway, Reconstruction ended the remnants of Confederate nationalism and of slavery, making the newly free slaves citizens with civil rights apparently guaranteed by the three new constitutional amendments. I think One of them is probably the 14th Amendment, which is giving away of U.S. citizenship to people. Not state citizenship, but U.S. citizenship. The three visions of Civil War memory appeared during Reconstruction. The reconciliationist vision, which was rooted in coping with the death and devastation the war had brought, the white supremacist vision, which included terror and violence, and the emancipationist vision, which sought full freedom, citizenship, and constitutional equality for African Americans. Okay, so screen recorder is a faster way to get through all these presidential elections. So here's the presidential election of 1868. Ulysses S. Grant was the Republican. Horatio Seymour was the Democratic candidate. Just as a note to self and anybody else who's interested, there's a separate clickable link for the Reconstruction era, which I think is very telling as to what was going on in that period. It's a very long article. The Reconstruction era was the period between 1863 to 1877. In the context of the American history, the term has two applications. The first applies to the complete history. Okay, I think I read that already. Reconstruction and civil rights of former slaves was a hotly debated issue in the Union. Grant supported the Reconstruction plans of the Radical Republicans in Congress, which favored the 14th Amendment, which full citizenship and civil rights for freed people, including suffrage for adult freed men. The Democratic platform condemned Negro supremacy and demanded a restoration of states' rights, including the right of Southern states to determine for themselves whether to allow suffrage for adult free men. So I looked up the definition of freedman. A freedman or freedwoman is a former slave who has been released from slavery, usually by legal means. Historically, slaves were freed either, well, I won't read that, but I guess suffrage to freed men and freed women was an issue, maybe because they weren't landowners. During this time, greenbacks were an issue, so that's the nature of the currency, and I do believe this relates to the gold standard, or tying the greenback to the gold standard and making one redeemable for the other. I'll just read the definition. Greenbacks were paper currency issued by the United States during the American Civil War. They were in two forms: demand notes, issued in 1861 to 1862, and United States notes issued in 1862 to 1865. They were legal tender by law, but were not backed by gold or silver. Only the credibility of the U.S. I'm not reading the rest. The 1868 campaign of Horatio Seymour versus Ulysses S. Grant was conducted vigorously, being fought out largely on the question of how Reconstruction should be conducted. Okay, moving forward, this is the U.S. presidential election of 1872 between Ulysses S. Grant, the Republican, and Horace Greeley, who was the Democratic, or Liberal Republican. Huh. Okay, the reason for a Liberal Republican, I guess, in short, is this. Democratic Party leaders believed that the only hope for defeating Grant was to unite around Greeley, who was also a Republican, and the 1872 Democratic National Convention nominated the Liberal Republican ticket. Okay, so there was another party introduced called the Labor Reform Party, and around this time there was a lot of labor movements, like the Knights of Labor and things like that. Obviously this party really didn't survive, and I don't know the history behind it, but that was an issue. Just as a comment, Ulysses S. Grant was backed by large financial entrepreneurs like Jay Cooke, Cornelius Vanderbilt, Alex Turney, Stewart, and Henry Hilton, and John Astor. And during this 1872 presidential election, women's suffrage was also a central issue. Moving forward, the U.S. States presidential election of 1876. The United States presidential election of 1876 was the 23rd one. It was one of the most contentious and controversial presidential elections in American history, and is known for being the catalyst for the end of the Reconstruction period. So the end of the Reconstruction. It was between Rutherford B. Hayes, who's a Republican, and Samuel J. Tilden, who's a Democrat. There was still this issue of disenfranchised black voters. I'll read that. Disenfranchisement after the Reconstruction era in the United States of America was based on the series of laws, new constitutions, and practices in the South that were deliberately used to prevent black citizens from registering to vote and voting. Okay, this is the Democratic platform. It also called for a treaty protection for naturalized United States citizens visiting their homelands, restriction on Asian immigration, tariff reform, and opposition to land grants for railroads. The Alcohol Prohibition Party was just starting. In 1876, Colorado became a state. And it's hard to put into a few words, but there was a railroad scandal called the Credit Mobilier of America scandal, which started in 1867, and I guess it was discovered in 1872.